Hi, this is Patrick Henry with QuestFusion with The Real Deal, What Matters. I'm here today with Sara Zaknoen, Doctor Sara Zaknoen. Sara's a medical doctor that specializes in oncology, that's cancer-related stuff, and hematology, which is blood-related stuff. Mm-hmm. So she's super smart, super patient, and very hardworking. That's what it would take to be a medical doctor. Sara spent the bulk of her career looking for cures for various forms of cancer, blood disease, and immune system diseases. Sara spent 18 years working for both large pharmaceutical companies and small biotech companies, including leadership roles at Schering-Plough, Schering-Plough, and Novartis. Sara served as the chief medical officer of 2 successful biotech startups. And Sara is an expert on the FDA approval process for new drugs and has tons of experience in how to design and manage clinical trials of new drugs. She is a strong leader and just a really cool lady. So Sara is now an independent consultant working for both large and small biotech companies that are developing new drugs for various forms of cancer and blood disease. So welcome, Sara. I'm really glad you could do this with us.
Thank you, and thank you for the very nice introduction. I'm very flattered.
So tell us a little bit for our listeners, which are primarily entrepreneurs, a little bit about yourself personally and how you got into medicine and then how you got into medical research.
Sure, I was one of those geeky kids that, like at age 5, knew they wanted to do something in science.
Okay.
And so once I said the word doctor, I'm sure my parents were very happy to sort of keep reinforcing that and pushing me down that road. But I was always interested in science and really enjoyed it. Went to college, obviously, and was the geek that had the chemistry and biology major with a physics minor.
Oh, awesome.
And what got me really interested in cancer and research was actually a course that I took in undergraduate on RNA tumor viruses.
Okay.
So I'm going to date myself here and say that in college, that's when the big news about DNA cloning broke.
Okay.
People remember that, there were these big worries that, scientists were going to release, super bugs because they were using E. coli to put clone genes into. Okay. So I took that course and I thought, this is just so cool. Thinking, oh, cancer's caused by viruses and we're going to cure cancer now. So that's what got me really interested in going into cancer research. Okay. And then going into medicine was what I had planned to do because I had planned to do an academic career and clone my gene and settle into
make multiple Saras.
No, not me. Clone a gene and settle into the drudgery of writing grants, through the NIH and seeing patients and teaching and
So kind of the academic research type of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did that evolve into getting into the more corporate side of things?
Well, I after I finished my fellowship, so in medicine you first get an expertise in something like internal medicine or pediatrics or surgery, and then if you want to specialize beyond that, you would then take a subspecialty. And as you said, mine is hematology oncology. So I did 3 years of internal medicine, and then you do another 3 years of fellowship. And then, you're supposed to, either go out and practice as a physician or go for more training or try and get an academic job. Okay. You can't really get an academic job because you don't really have a publication history. You can't fund yourself. So I took a fellowship position at the National Cancer Institute. They had what was then called the Medical Staff Fellowship Program for folks who had already completed their fellowship but wanted to do more research. And I was in a lab of a very prominent researcher who had cloned some very important genes in B-cell malignancies, which were what I was interested in. Okay. And I got there and I hated lab-based research. Okay. I just did not like, pipetting and doing this sort of stuff at the bench. I was much more interested in doing clinical research. So writing protocols that treated patients with experimental drugs, which we also got to do there. Okay. And so I transferred out of his lab into another lab and did more clinical research.
Okay.
And then took an academic position doing clinical research at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine.
Okay.
But what they don't tell you is that the grant mechanisms through the National Cancer Institute and the National Institutes of Health really don't have a mechanism to fund clinical researchers.
Oh.
So all of those grants basically pay for salary and lab expenses.
Okay.
So it's for lab-based researchers who need to buy equipment and rent lab space and hire techs and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So after about 4 years of kind of trying to, raise enough money by writing protocols and, seeing patients and that sort of stuff, I started to look at other ways in which I could use my clinical research expertise and my oncology expertise to really do what I wanted to do, which wasn't to see patients 24/7. I never really wanted to be a private practice doctor. I didn't mind taking care of patients.
Yeah.
Loved teaching, the residents and medical students and fellows that we had.
Yeah.
But really saw that if I stayed where I was, I would end up, basically seeing patients 24/7.
Okay.
So I had been asked to be on the board of some pharmaceutical companies, like their scientific advisory committees for certain protocols, and I really liked it.
Okay.
And I got to talking with them, and one thing led to another. I did a couple of interviews, and I got a offer from Schering-Plough,
Okay.
which is now Merck. It was acquired by Merck several years ago.
Okay.
In New Jersey, and I accepted it, and the rest is history.
Now, you were in New Jersey at the time, or you had
I was
lived
in Cincinnati.
there? You're in Cincinnati, okay.
Moved to New Jersey.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I mean, Cincinnati, I grew up in St. Louis, so it's kind
Oh,
of
sure.
that, Midwestern
Sure.
town. So
Sure.
Jersey's definitely much more of a suburb of New York, so it's very
Yes.
different out there.
Yes, yes. And I lived in Hoboken, which is sometimes called the sixth borough. So
Yeah.
it's right across the
Right.
It's right across the Hudson.
But that's cool. I mean, living
It was
in New
nice.
York City, I lived out in Jersey for about, 8 months out of college. That was my first sales job, and it was fun kind of having access to New York City. So.
Oh yeah, no, it was fun. I lived there about almost 10 years. Really
Okay.
enjoyed it.
And then what brought you to California?
So I came out here to take a position. So an old Schering colleague had left the company, had come out here, I think 2005, was working with another privately owned company here in San Diego. And to make a long story short, the company that they were working for was acquired by a large pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
They didn't want one of the compounds that this smaller company had, and so my friend and another guy that he worked with decided that they would roll out a small company based around that one asset.
Okay.
Got some venture money around it.
Okay.
Called me and said, "Hey, why don't you come out and be my chief medical officer?" We came out, interviewed, talked to the board, looked at the compound, and came out here in fall of 2006.
Well, it's a pretty big move, especially, like that stage of your career. I mean, you're an established person both in academia and National Institute of Health and, working for big companies. I mean, what kind of made you take the leap to become, an executive in a startup?
So my plan after I joined Big Pharma was to learn how to do drug development in a big company,
Okay.
where you really learn how to sort of do it right, quote unquote.
Right.
There's money, there's people, there's expertise, and you really learn how to do things. What's important, what things you have to look out for, what things are going to be the drivers of cost and lost time in drug development.
Yeah.
But that I wanted to either go to a smaller company or become a consultant. I'm not a big company person.
Okay.
I'm not very patient with layers of
Management, bureaucracy, and yeah.
And I'm a person that needs to feel like I'm personally making a difference.
Okay.
Not just reading a document and passing it on to the next vice president that's going to read it and
Right.
pass it on to the next vice president. So
Right.
I'm also a bit of a risk taker, and I have to say, I was like, I got to get out of the Northeast. It was just cold winters and
Yeah.
lots of travel with Big Pharma. And, You know, just the rat race of living, you know, near Manhattan. I mean, if you lived in Jersey, you know what that's like.
Yeah.
It's really...
It's intense.
It just wears your soul down after a while.
Right.
So after 10 years, I actually can remember, it was January of 2006.
Yeah.
I had come out here with other folks from Novartis. We were going to do a due diligence on a small company that was in San Diego. And I got here, we were staying at the Estancia Hotel.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there outside looking at this beautiful grounds with a wonderful glass of California Pinot Noir and thinking, what am I doing in New Jersey?
That was very similar to me. I always wanted to move to Southern California out of college. I grew up in St. Louis, went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, then Michigan, and then New Jersey. And when I got off the plane from New Jersey to Orange County, I moved initially to Newport Beach. You know, I wanted to be like the Pope and kiss the ground.
Oh, and I've never been like that, you know. I was little miss, I could never live in Southern California. There's no culture. And, you know, I just sat there and I went, what are you thinking? It's January, you know. It was like 7 below when you left and you're sitting outside.
So what do you think are like the most important qualities for being a medical doctor and being a researcher?
Most important qualities in being a medical doctor is you really have to like taking care of people.
Okay.
Medicine is not all about the science. It's probably 15% about the science and understanding medicine, and 85% listening to people's problems.
Mm-hmm.
In cancer, you know, you're there, people are very upset. Their families are very upset.
Yeah.
So you have to be there to repeat over and over what you've said, because people don't hear, you know, it's just such a shocking diagnosis.
Yeah.
And, you know, they just immediately shut down. And, you know, families get very upset, and families don't communicate correctly. And so to be a good physician, you really have to enjoy really taking care of people. But you have to be very smart. You have to, you know, study hard. You have to know the medicine.
Yeah.
And you have to have a very good memory, because you really need to keep a lot of it sort of right there in your brain.
Okay.
Not a lot of time to go through, wait, while I go look something up.
Yeah.
You can do that after, but...
Sure.
But you have to sort of be very confident when you're with the patient that you know what you're doing, and, you know, you're going to, you know, lead them down the path of, you know, a course of treatment that, you know, you and the patient agree is the best thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be just super difficult. That, I mean, you could die. So it's like, you know, people are definitely, and it is a family disease. I remember a friend of mine, our daughters did Indian Princesses together. He got some kind of neck or throat cancer, and just awful, I mean, just all the stuff he went through, and he eventually passed away, and 2 young kids, and just it's something that affects the whole family.
It does.
It's crazy. It does. So I went through the FDA website, which was quite entertaining. You know, anything from the federal government always amuses me. But so it told me that the approval process for a new drug seemed pretty simple. You know, there's this 12-step process, FDA phase 1, 2, and 3. You know, steps in the middle. Can you kind of walk us through that, and like, you know, just in layman's terms? And I've read something in kind of the research for this interview that it takes 12 years on average from the time that you have the initial idea to a new pharmaceutical is actually available in the market. So, I mean, that's serious stuff.
It's serious stuff, but it's probably true.
Yeah.
In fact, I think 12 years, you know, from the first idea is probably a pretty good amount of time.
Yeah.
So really it starts with, as you say, the idea. So, you know, there's some target, you know, on a cancer cell.
Yeah.
And I can only talk about, you know, cancer drugs.
Sure.
There's some mutation in a gene. There's something that now has been described that, say, is the cause of, let's say, lung cancer.
Okay.
So then you have to do the research to figure out what would be the best way to treat that mutation, you know, or to in some way get something to that cell that could make it right again. Or kill it.
Okay.
And that is what we call preclinical, you know, or development.
Okay.
And that's a lot of chemistry, a lot of computer-aided drug design, a lot of wet medicinal chemistry, and that can take years.
Yeah.
Because getting a compound, a chemical compound that you can give to a human and not harm them, that isn't going to be metabolized, most of the drugs that we give are actually poisons. And cancer drugs are definitely poisons. They're there to kill the tumor cells more than they kill normal cells, but they do damage normal cells. Because
so this is why in chemotherapy people get so sick.
Sure. Exactly, because you're basically, Now, the old time sort of chemo, the newer drugs now that are directed against a particular mutation that only the cancer cell has, are a little easier to take, but they do have side effects. And now the new drugs that are treating the immune system, the Immuno oncology drugs, they help the body's own immune system recognize the cancer and kill it, but they also have some fairly significant side effects.
Now, when I think of immune system stuff, the only thing I know is kind of a layman out there is just about AIDS, or HIV. Are there other immune diseases that are related to cancers and things like that?
Sure. So any patients that have immune deficiencies, so there are inherited immune deficiencies, there are patients who, say, are being treated with certain drugs for diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease that suppress the immune system, then they have a higher incidence of developing cancers, because the immune system, its job is to, get rid of and destroy infectious things, but also get rid of and destroy any of our own cells that have mutated and gone wrong, gone bad. Cancer is a cell gone bad. And the immune system is set up to recognize what our normal cells look like and to get rid of things that don't look like our normal cells. Unfortunately, cancers are very smart. They're not really, but just by chance mutation, they have developed ways in which they suppress the immune system. So they trick the immune system into thinking that they're just, we're just a normal cell like everybody else. And then the body doesn't reject it, and after the cancer grows to a certain size, it's very hard for the body's own immune system to get rid of it. And so some of the newer immuno-oncology drugs basically unleash the body's own immune system to re-recognize that this cancer is a danger and needs to be
so kind of wake up, fight this, because you're kind of being deceived that there's not a problem.
Exactly.
So
those drugs, it's very complex to design those drugs, and then you have to go through all the animal testing, because you have to, mostly in cancer it's done in mouse models. So they inject human cancers into laboratory mice and then treat them with the compounds to see if the cancer goes away, and then you have to make sure that the drug isn't going to be metabolized or destroyed by the body's system before it even has a chance to work. And then, once you've gone through all of that, then you start in the human trials. And as you said, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So phase 1 studies are where you refer to the first in human or first in man. So the first time you actually give this drug that you've now created and manufactured to a human being. So it could be a pill, it could be an intravenous thing. Usually it's either a pill or an IV. And you're looking basically to see what the toxicity is, what's going to happen. You start with very low doses and you treat small numbers of patients at, say your first dose, and if that's okay, then you increase the dose a little more and you treat another group of patients until you start to see toxicity. And then... So
this is really all about not even curing what it's trying to cure, you're just making sure it doesn't hurt the person.
Correct. Very, very little in the way of effect against the cancer in phase 1 studies. Sometimes you see it when the drugs are directed against a particular mutation. Say, for instance, I think a lot of folks may be familiar with a drug called Gleevec, which is a pill that's given for a particular form of chronic leukemia. It was developed by Novartis Oncology, and it's been out now for probably about 10 years. It's directed against the particular mutation that everyone who has this cancer gets. So there's a mutation that happens in the precursors of their white blood cells in their bone marrow that causes these precursors to have a growth advantage, and then they take over the bone marrow.
Okay.
And this drug is directed against that mutation and kills the cells, and basically is a lifesaver. It's basically turned a leukemia that was 100% fatal, unless you had a bone marrow transplant, into something that's now a chronic disease. So
Wow.
when you have that type of a drug, and you treat patients in your phase 1 study that have that mutation, then once you get to an efficacious dose, you may actually start to see some results. But in
Okay.
general, most phase 1 studies are looking at toxicity. How
Okay.
much drug can we give? What's too much drug? And what are the side effects going to be?
Okay. And how many people are typically involved in like a phase 1 study for a new pharma?
Oh, anywhere from,
New drug.
I would say, 20 patients to 500 patients. You know,
Okay.
because again, companies, the lines of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, especially with these so-called targeted agents, begin to blur. Because if you treat patients with your targeted agent and their cancers have the target, then you see responses, and you can often just expand your study and go to the FDA with basically a very large phase 1 study and get at least an initial conditional approval. But in traditional sort of chemotherapy kinds of stuff, then you probably would have anywhere from 20 to up to maybe 100 patients in a phase 1 study.
Okay. And then phase 2, you start to look at what they call it, efficacy? Is that what it is?
Phase 2, you start to look again, safety as well.
So
because
toxicity still...
more, yeah, so you're treating larger groups of patients,
Okay.
but you're also starting to see whether you're starting to have effects in any of the cancers. Are you shrinking tumors? You know, are you making people feel better? Are you extending their lives? That
Now,
sort
do
of
you
thing.
do you do that side by side with placebo type of stuff to see if there's a difference, or how does all that stuff
In
work?
some designs, so some phase 2 studies can have a placebo if your design is a randomized study.
Okay.
So the patient is randomized to receive one or the other arms.
And how do you make the decision around how to do that? When you're designing a study, like what are the things that you look at, or is it stuff that you get to decide, or the FDA tells you what to do, or kind of how does that work?
No. That is really the decision is for those sorts of designs rests with the pharmaceutical company or the biotech.
Okay.
And generally what you're thinking is, if you have a drug that's going to shrink a tumor on an x-ray, make it go away, or if it's a leukemia where you can very easily by blood counts track it,
Okay.
you don't really need a placebo
Okay.
to compare to, because nothing that we know is going to shrink a tumor that
Yeah.
isn't active.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at something like a time-dependent variable, so things like a concept we call progression-free survival. So you give the drug to the patient, and then you measure the time it takes for the tumor to start regrowing.
Okay.
Okay, so it may shrink a little bit, but it's not going to go away. It may become stable in size for a certain amount of time. And when you have that kind of a design, you often want to have a placebo arm to compare it to, because of the way in which the FDA views that kind of data.
Okay.
So the FDA basically says, if you shrink a tumor and make it go away, it's probably the result of your drug.
Okay.
But it's much more difficult to measure things like progression-free survival, so it's probably best to have a control arm.
Okay. Interesting.
So, yeah. So phase
How
2
do
study.
you learn all this stuff?
I've been doing this for almost 30 years, It's, I learned, talking to lots of smart people, when you first get into the industry on how to design studies, and many unsuccessful visits with the FDA where we as a company have said, we're going to do this and this to design our drug, and you always say, does the agency agree?
Yeah.
And what the agency says is, no.
Yeah.
We would prefer a randomized in that way they may tell you what they expect, and then you can do it or not do it. It's your risk. Basically the FDA would say to you, it's your risk as a company. But then when you come to bring us your packet to get your drug approved, then we might not be so happy if you didn't do things the way that we told you to.
Yeah. So then phase 3 is
in phase 2, at least in oncology, you get some idea of, say, where your drug might work. So in phase 2, let's say you start to have tumor shrinkages in patients with, let's say, lung cancer. So then phase 3, you may design your study in lung cancer, and these are usually larger studies. So now you've gone from maybe 100 to 200 in a phase 2 study to several hundred, up to 800 to 1,000 patients.
Okay.
They're generally randomized, so there's a placebo, there's a placebo control. You may compare yourself to a placebo, so it may be your drug versus nothing, which is difficult to do because patients with cancer don't want the chance that they'll be randomized to get basically a sugar pill. Usually what you do is you add yourself to some chemotherapy that's already approved. So everyone gets the chemotherapy, both sides, both arms, and then one arm gets the chemotherapy plus your drug, and the other arm gets the chemotherapy plus the placebo. So they're getting what's called the standard of care, what they would get anyway.
Yeah. But
then they have a chance to be given the experimental drug as well.
Okay, interesting.
And those studies, several years. It takes time to enroll 1,000 patients, and then if it's a survival study, and I hate to say that because people aren't, people who don't do cancer research, it's hard to hear that your endpoint is basically the number of people who are dying or not dying, and so then you have to wait, a certain amount of time for those events to occur. So you can see how that can rapidly chew up 12 years worth of time.
Yeah. And then there's post phase 3 stuff that you get involved with?
Sure. So there's phase 4 stuff is usually things after you've done your new drug application. So after you've gone to the FDA and let's say the FDA is approving your drug, but they say they want X, Y, and Z. We want you to do a study in patients with kidney disease or in patients with liver disease, so that we have an idea of how to dose your drug in those patients. Or we want you to do a combination of your drug with this other drug. So the FDA can ask for any number of other studies.
Well, thanks, Sarah. This has been really great. I've learned a lot. Yeah. But it's been just fantastic talking to you and getting to know you a little bit better as well.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And maybe you can get my email to work now?
Possibly. So this is Patrick Henry from QuestFusion with The Real Deal, What Matters.